Well, as they're transitioning, I would encourage you to turn or click with me to John 18. We're going to be continuing on in the book of John, loving like Jesus, and learning from Jesus today. So my big question for you as we get started today is, who are you taking a cue from? Who are you learning life from? Who are you learning how to react in life from? And as Mackenzie shared last week, about Jesus' prayer, and actually what I would probably call the Lord's Prayer. We have a prayer that we say that we call the Lord's Prayer, but this is the one that he really prayed, right? For his disciples, but also for the world, that he came to ultimately to die on the cross for each and every one of us throughout time. That's what he came for, and that's who he prayed for. And so we're transitioning from his prayer. He literally crosses a valley into a garden with olive trees, and that's the scene that we're entering into in John 18. And as we think about who we take our cue from today, I want to share a quick story with you about our first dog. So Holly and I, just after we got married, some of you have known us that long, and welcome Eves back to the country, by the way. We got a dog soon after we got married because I was traveling a lot. I was an admissions counselor and going to lots of college fairs and college and high school campuses throughout the Northwest. And so there was a month in there where I was home like 2 or 3 days that entire month, putting on lots of miles on a rental car. And so we decided that, Holly's home by herself. We're going to get a dog, kind of as a companion, but also as a little bit of a guard dog. So we went to the Humane Society, and we got this dog that we named Lily. And Lily sounds like a very sweet name, but she could be very ferocious, and she kind of looked like a wolf. So she was actually a Border Collie Chow Chow mix, which is kind of a funny combination. So she had like this really sucked-in gut and a purple speckled tongue, like a Chow Chow. So Lily was a very interesting dog because she would cue off of everything that we did and how we were feeling. Like a lot of animals do, they kind of take their cue from their master, right? And so if we were with Lily and somebody came to the door and we were feeling good about that somebody who came to the door, like we had our mail dropped off in a mail slot right next to the door, we were okay with the mail person coming to the door. That's a good thing, right? We wanted to get our mail. And so over time, Lily learned to be okay with that. At the beginning, she wasn't so okay with that, and she would go bark at the mailman through the glass. But she learned to cue off of us and how we were feeling. Well, the one thing that she didn't cue off of us was, for some reason, it was very odd. We worked with international students, and so we had a lot of people who didn't look like us over to our house. And the one type of person that she never really got along with was Asian males, for some reason. I'm not sure why. It was really weird. Asian females, she was okay with. Asian males, she never. So maybe it was something in her history. But for the most part, this dog would cue off of us and how we were feeling, right? And so if it was a stranger coming to the door, she would get kind of defensive and maybe bark and, make sure that she was ready to go. But if somebody that we knew, a family member, a friend, and we were feeling okay, she would settle down and take her cue from us. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today, cueing in on Jesus, because there are a lot of people and things that we can take our cues from in this world. And if they're not Jesus, they can get us off track pretty quickly in how we react to things. And so we're going to jump into this story. We're not going to read the whole chapter today, but the scene really is Jesus was leading his close followers, his close disciples, into the garden, into this grove of olive trees, and right on their tail was Judas, leading. It says a whole detachment of of soldiers with them. And we don't know exactly how many that was, but a detachment usually meant somewhere between 200 and 600 soldiers, which sounds like an awful lot when you're up against like 12 guys, right? But as this chapter starts out by saying, it says that they actually brought lanterns and lamps and weapons with them to arrest Jesus. So they come up, and Jesus kind of breaks the ice and says, "Who are you looking for?" And they said, "Jesus of Nazareth." And he says, "I am he." And then they all kind of stumble back, like as if they weren't expecting him to say that. And then it picks up in verse 7. And if you read with me, verses 7 to 11, Jesus asked them, "Who is it that you want?" And they said, "Jesus of Nazareth." "I told you that I am he," Jesus answered. "If you're looking for me, then let these men go." This happened so that the words he had spoken would be fulfilled. "I have not lost one of those you gave me." Verse 10, then Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant, cutting off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. Jesus commanded Peter, "Put your sword away. Shall I not drink the cup the Father has given me?" So what do you do when something unexpected happens? And I would suggest to you that we should look to Jesus for what's next, to take our cue from him. I would imagine that in this situation that Peter was kind of in shock. What is going on here? And I want to encourage you for a moment just to put yourself in Peter's position. He was ready to go into battle for Jesus. He was ready to lead the rebellion against the Roman Empire for Jesus. He was ready to go enough that he had a sword with him. Now, this wasn't against what Jesus said, really, because actually, if we look in the book of Luke, chapter 22, verse 36, Jesus actually tells his disciples to go and buy swords. Okay, but what Jesus was preparing for wasn't something that Peter was expecting to happen. Right? Jesus wasn't intending to overthrow the Roman government. Jesus wasn't intending to overthrow the Jewish religious leaders either. Jesus had a different plan in mind. And so Peter, raring to go, he sees what's happening. Jesus is going to get arrested. I'm not going to let this happen. So he takes out his sword and he cuts off the guy's ear. And I've always wondered, why would he cut off his ear? Like, there are much worse things you could cut off than some guy's ear, right? If you're really trying to go to battle, you don't aim for their ear, right? So I wonder if there was a little bit of hesitation in Peter. Now, this is all speculation and reading between the lines, right? That maybe there was a little bit of hesitation in him of, I know I want to defend Jesus. I'm not sure exactly how far Jesus wants me to go here. And so I'm just going to start with his ear, you know? And of course, we know, we don't see it in the book of John here, but we actually know from Luke that Jesus actually heals Malchus's ear. So he takes a moment in the middle of this very tense situation, and he actually puts his ear back on and heals him. It's an interesting little snippet in the middle of this situation. So as we were talking about this in speaking team this Tuesday, Mackenzie pointed out that Peter's reaction was really basically the textbook grouping of reactions that we could have in a situation like this. We often hear about fight, flight, or freeze, right? Like Peter literally does this in this chapter. He does all of it. He starts by fighting. He cuts off his ear, right? And he's ready to go with the sword. And then as we continue on in this chapter, he actually, fight, flight, he runs away and kind of hides in the crowd around the fire, not even wanting to identify with Jesus. And then at the end, we really see him freezing, right? He doesn't know what to do next. And so he just kind of fades into the background of the situation. So Peter really gives us an example of all three of those: fight, flight, and freeze. Ways that we handle unexpected situations. And there's actually a word that we refer to unexpected or unmet expectations. It's called shock. As I said, I work with international students, and usually at the beginning of the year, we talk about culture shock because they're coming into a situation, a culture that they're not familiar with. And so it's natural to go through culture shock in a situation, in an environment that you just don't know what to expect. You don't know what to do. And so we talk about that, and it's a form of shock. And it really is important who we take our cues from in those moments of shock. Right? We're going to talk a little bit about medical shock in a moment. And in a situation where you are in maybe a car accident is a classic example where somebody goes into shock, right? Nobody expects to get in a car accident unless you're in like that derby where they purposely run their cars into each other, right? I'm forgetting the name of that. Demolition derby, there it is. Most people are not expecting to get in a car accident. It's unmet expectations, right? You're intending to go to your place safely, and your day is interrupted, right? And so you tend to go into shock. It's a very common thing to do. So who do you take your cues from in that situation, right? You take your cues from maybe those who are there to help you, the paramedics, somebody who stops by to see how they can help and what they can do, right? You take your cues from somebody outside of your situation, right? Holly and I were in our early, probably, I think it was our first year of marriage. We were invited to this, it was a hotel conference center area, and it was to check out these new pots and pans. Maybe you guys have been invited to something like that before too. But they made this nice little dinner, and as a young, poor couple, a free dinner was very welcome. Probably better food than we were eating at home. And so we sat down, we had this nice dinner that they cooked on these very beautiful, expensive pots and pans. And then, of course, at the end, what we weren't really planning for was that they put this order form in front of you and said, hey, how many of these would you like to buy? And as a poor young couple, we didn't want to buy any. But we started looking at each other and, taking cues from each other. And, we ended up buying one of the packages of pots and pans. Okay? So we get in the car, we're driving home, and we're looking at each other like, what did we just do? We don't have that kind of money. What did we sign up for? And we realized that we were each thinking that the other person wanted to buy this set of pots and pans. And so we were kind of encouraging each other. Okay, yeah, let's do it. And as we were driving home, we realized that neither of us wanted to buy the pots and pans. And we were just trying to please the other person, right? And so we were able, thankfully, to reverse the process and cancel our order and got out of getting in way too much debt. All that to say is we have to be careful who we take our cues from. Even someone that we love, sometimes we can misinterpret the signals, right? That's a little bit of shock. We experienced that on the drive home that night of, okay, we need to be careful with how we communicate with each other. We need to be really clear about this, what our intentions are, what we want to see happen. And so we actually put a rule in our marriage that we said anything that is an investment over $100, we're going to sit down and talk specifically about it, and we're actually going to wait overnight. And if we really want to buy it the next day, then we'll move forward with it. And if we wake up the next day and it was like the pots and pans and we're good with the ones we already have, then we'll move on and we'll save ourselves $100 or more, right? So that's where reality kicks in. So we start with shock, and then hopefully we can move into reality. And Jesus says in verse 11, it actually says he commanded Peter, right? He didn't just reply to him, he commanded him. And he says, "Put your sword away. Shall I not drink the cup the Father has given me?" This is where I'm headed. Like, I'm meant to suffer and die. You need to let me go there. Peter had an opportunity to take his cue from Jesus. And it's important who we listen to. When we were in Taiwan together in our first year, we got a scooter and a motorcycle, which we thought were really cool. Having not ridden a motorcycle or a scooter before, like this was fun, zipping around on those little things. And we ended up in 2 scooter accidents our first year. And we were talking with one of our missionary friends there, and he said, well, there are really only 2 kinds of people in Taiwan. There are those who have been in a scooter accident and those who haven't been in one yet but will get in one. So he said, okay, well, we're in that second category now. And we had some other friends ask us the question, how, are you intending to be here another year? And we said, yeah, we think so. He said, okay, well, I would encourage you to go buy a car because it's better to have the metal on the outside than on the inside. And after 2 scooter accidents, we decided that was probably a good move. And so we held on to the scooter, but we also got a car for some of our longer trips to be a little bit more safe. So thankfully, we listened to our friend who knew a little bit better than us, and we took a cue from a local who knew the situation. When I was on, some of you know that I hiked the Grand Canyon a few weeks ago, and as I was preparing for that, it's something where people are like evacuated from. Some people die, especially in the middle of summer, right? So it's not the most ideal time to go. I would not encourage you to go in July. But when that's the time that you have available, you go in July. And so I prepared as much as possible. I carried lots of water, had lots of, equipment stuff with me, and got to the bottom, and I was talking with one of the park rangers, and, it was meant to get into the 100 and teens that day. And I actually have a picture of me with a thermometer that was in the sun, like totally maxed out at like 140 plus. But it was only 111 in the shade. So you sit in the shade, and the park ranger encouraged, anyone who came by, go soak in the creek. Like, that's the best thing you can do. Fully clothed, just go down, get wet. It's like 60-some degrees. You will feel so much better. And in a desert environment like that, you get out and you're dry in about 30 minutes, even with your clothes soaking. So I did that several times that afternoon. And he was saying, you're basically in this kind of heat, your body is kind of going back and forth with almost going into shock because of, and you can actually go into like heat stroke if you get too hot and your core temperature starts to raise enough that your organs actually start to shut down and not do the functions that they're supposed to do. And so he said the best thing you can do, of course, stay cool, stay in the shade this afternoon, but before dinner tonight, go down about 10 or 15 minutes before dinner and make sure you soak in the creek again, because then your core temperature will come down, and then your digestive system will function better, and you'll actually have more of an appetite. You'll eat better, replenish your fuel that you need for hiking the next day, and so make sure you go down and soak in the creek. And I did, and it was great. Like, I actually finished my dinner and had a good, strong appetite, which I don't normally do when I'm hiking. So take advice from the locals, from those who know, right? And the reason why when you go into shock, the reason why you are in shock is that your body actually takes your blood from your vital organs to other parts of your body, right? And when you're like in the car accident situation, your adrenaline's flowing and you're just ready to go. Like they even have situations where, a car's falling on somebody and like some little old lady comes up and picks up the car, right? And moves the car and gets the person out, right? Because our bodies kind of gear up for the worst case scenario. And so your blood can actually flow into the extremities of your body. And that's a very similar thing when you're getting overheated, that your blood goes to the outsides of your skin to dissipate that heat, right? And so soaking in the creek was a way to say, okay, I'm going to cool down, my body's feeling better, my blood can actually go from my extremities back into my core so that I can eat a proper dinner, right, to feel better, right? Lower my core temperature. It's a reason why people use blankets, or paramedics or hospital workers will actually show up with a blanket to put around you if you're going into shock, right? It's a comforting thing to have this blanket on you, but it also helps kind of regulate your temperature and help you to return back to normal so you can function properly. So who are you taking your cue from? As we continue on in this chapter, so Jesus is arrested. He's taken to Annas' house, which is the father-in-law of the high priest. It's almost like he had a first kind of vetting by the father-in-law before he's sent to Caiaphas, the high priest. And so he's there. Peter kind of follows along, and he's let in to the courtyard, and it's a cold night, and so they have a fire going, and he just circles up around the fire. And he's asked, are you associated with Jesus? And he says, no, right? And he ends up actually denying Jesus 3 times, as Jesus predicted. And we get into verse 25, and he's still there as Jesus was taken over to Caiaphas, the high priest. Simon Peter is still there, and it says he stood warming himself. He was asked, you are not one of his disciples, are you? And Peter denied it, saying, I am not. One of the high priest's servants, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, challenged him. Didn't I see you with him at the olive grove? Again, Peter denied it. And at that moment, a rooster began to crow. So as we close today, I want to ask you the question this is a question that I ask myself as well. Am I responding in this situation out of fear, or am I responding out of truth? Who am I taking my cue from? And we all have situations that are going on in our lives and things that we can react to. Who am I taking my cue from in this situation? Am I taking it from Jesus and what he says and the truth of his word, who I am and who this other person is and what this situation is going to end up being like, or putting my hope and my trust in him? Or am I taking my cue from those around me who can give me all kinds of advice? And like Peter, taking his cue maybe even from the soldiers who are arriving, who had their swords and other weapons ready to go. And so he just looks at the situation and pulls out his sword and reacts, right? And it's easy for us to do that, to just immediately react to the situation, not taking our cue from Jesus, who's the one who's stable and who knows the future. And he knew where he was heading. And if Peter had taken the time to look at Jesus and understand that a little bit more, what would his reaction have been like? Right? Instead of going into that fight, flight, or freeze, would he have understood, okay, Jesus has to do this. This is what he's been saying all along. Okay, I want to be on board with what Jesus is doing. with what Jesus says is next. So what's next for you this week? What are those decisions that are uncertain? What are the things that you don't know exactly how to handle? And who are you looking to get your cue from? So worship team, I would invite you guys to come, and in a moment we're gonna take communion. And as we prepare our hearts for communion today, it's a remembrance of what Jesus has already done for us, and it's an opportunity for us to look to Jesus again as the one that we take our cue from, as the one that we get our answers from, and the one who has invited us to trust him. Let's pray. Lord, we come to you today, and we thank you that you endured the cross for us. We thank you that you looked at an impossible situation, at least from human eyes, of where this world was headed and the sin that had caught us all up. And you looked at this world and you said, I'm going to enter that world. And I'm going to come and save that world. So God, we thank you that you sent your son Jesus here. We thank you that he endured suffering and that he went willingly into this arrest and into what was going to come, and eventually into death on the cross for us. So today, as we reflect on that, as we just acknowledge our shortcomings and our fears and our sins and the mistakes that we have made to separate us from you, God, would we also recognize the steps that you have taken to bring us back into a strong relationship with you? God, we thank you for who you are and for what you have done. We pray all this in your name. Amen.